Jim Addington, United States Army, Vietnam. Jim's one of my warrant officers, one of my helicopter pilots flying Huey helicopters in Vietnam, and served 2 tours, one in 1969, one in 1972. He served with many different aviation battalions and groups under the 101st Airborne. And just an amazing man. He's featured in my film, Vietnam Remembered, and I'm happy to share his story with you today. I interviewed Jim in Addington, Maryland. It was 2006. He was 62 years of age at the time. It was November the 15th, 2006. Jim's still with us today and just tells an amazing story. The Air Mobile Division, what happened in Vietnam. And I want to thank Harry Marshall for making it possible to hear Jim's story today. Harry, God bless you again. Thank you for your continued support of my work. I salute you, sir, and for your patriotism, your dedication to our veterans, and making it possible for many to hear Jim's story. Folks, if you'd like to sponsor one of these stories, please get a hold of me. There's information in the video description and in the comments section of my video that you can donate to my work, or go to my website, larrycapeto.com, and sponsor a vet. But I'm just really, you know, the Vietnam stories are really close to my heart, closer to my age. And this story by Jim Addington is just one of the best of the warrant officers, those who flew in Vietnam, and all the different things he did. Again, 2 tours he served in Vietnam, and just a very gripping story. And I'm really happy to bring it to you today on the Voices of History channel. And I'd like to thank those of you who have sponsored my work, and for your dedication to our country too, and our veterans. So anyways, please subscribe to this channel, share these videos, folks. Let's keep this thing going. And sit back, relax, and let's listen to Jim Addington tell another one of my many stories from Vietnam. God bless you.
In 1969, and then again in 1972.
Okay. Give me the group you're with, battalion, company, all that stuff.
On first tour in '69, I started out with Bravo Company, 101st Aviation Battalion, 160th Aviation Group under the 101st Airborne Division for about 3 months, and then with Charlie Company, 158th Aviation Battalion, still with the 101st, and till about middle of May, with the flight into Hamburger Hill being my last flight with the division. And then I went down to the 48th Aviation Company in Ninh Hoa, a little bit north of Nha Trang. And then second tour, I was with the 114th Assault Helicopter Company at Vinh Long down in the Delta. And after about a month with them, we stood that down, and that was the last assault helicopter company that flew in Vietnam. And then I flew with a Corps Aviation Company for the rest of '72, supporting the advisors.
Mm-hmm. Tell me now, did you enlist?
I got drafted originally, and thought, well, I didn't want to walk, so I said, hey, flying helicopters got to be cool.
So where'd you go, to Fort Rutgers or?
Fort Walters, Texas for the first half of it, and Fort Rucker for the second half. Mm-hmm. And then right to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. Thought they had us trained, and then I found out the training really began.
Well, yeah, obviously. Tell me about your thoughts when you went into the service as far as Vietnam at the time. I mean, what were your thoughts? Did you know you were going to probably go to Vietnam when you went in, or?
Oh yeah, when I joined up to go to flight school, I knew where I was going. So there wasn't any two ways about it. My mom was scared to death, and then right at the last minute, she had a revelation and said that I was coming home. The Lord was going to take care of me. So I promised her that I was going to give him all the help I could. Tried to do that.
I like that. So you're going in. I mean, do you feel a duty to serve your country, or?
Well, when it wasn't a popular war, and I had been trying to go to school and bombed that out. So when my country called, you go. That's my feeling. Your country needs you, or your country calls, you go, if you want to live here. So
you go through your training. Do you have a chip on your shoulder? How do you feel about your training as you get over? I mean, like you said, you're learning. You want to fly.
Well, I grew up hunting with my dad and all his buddies and getting harassed that way, so I don't think anything in the Army that they pulled on me scared me too much. So mostly we just tried to have as much fun as we could along the way.
So take me in country now. The first time you're there, what you experienced and what it felt like, what it smelled like, what you saw. So tell me about Vietnam, arriving there.
The first thing that hits you when you get off the plane is the smell of burning manure, because they had to burn the outhouses were not able to dig them, so they had to burn it, and that smell permeated the whole country. And what the heck was that at first? Yeah. Then you get on a bus and it's got wire over the windows all around the bus. I said, well, what's all that for? So that's to keep people from throwing grenades on board. Okay. But we were I didn't think we were in any problems because we're on a secure base, hopefully.
So you're in Vietnam. Take me into what you start doing over there as a pilot. I mean, did you get right into it, or? Well,
first of all, you get settled in, and they try to give you a day or two to get your stuff squared away, and it depends on the unit. Some of the units, boy, you jumped into it. Where I was, they had enough people that I got a day or two to get situated, got my check ride, and with a 19-year-old kid, and I'm almost as old as the CO. I was already 24, so I felt like the old man almost. But then started flying and sitting over there wondering what the heck have I got myself into sometimes.
Take me on, well, first of all, tell me about, you flying the Hueys?
Yes.
Just give me a brief overview of the Huey, what it is, what it was used for in Vietnam.
Huey's a utility helicopter, max gross weight of 9,500 pounds. The D model, we called them D for dog, had a 1,100 horsepower engine and would barely get off with its own weight on a hot day. The H model had a 1,300 horsepower engine, and we later calculated that we were regularly picking up 11,000 and 12,000 pounds and just flying off with it. So the H model was beautiful. It got us out of places we didn't want to have to stay. So the Huey's the most underdecorated soldier in the Army.
Why underdecorated?
Well, I don't know of any Hueys that got presented awards. So.
Tell me about the crew on a Huey.
Crew had a pilot and a co-pilot, aircraft commander, and what we called him Peter Pilot, or the co-pilot. And so while I was with the 101st, in fact my whole first tour, I was the co-pilot. I switched units around enough that I never did make aircraft commander. I made that on second tour. And then you had a gunner and a crew chief, and they maintained the aircraft. So they owned the aircraft and let us fly it. But they also sat behind each one of them an M60 machine gun to suppress any fire and hopefully get us out of where we didn't want to go or didn't want to have to stay.
So tell me about some of the missions that you flew, what specific type mission, who's on board, and then going into a landing zone.
Well, we'd pick up, if they called for a combat assault, called a CA, we'd get briefed on that and then take the aircraft to line up in a staging area to pick up their troops. And then on the flight inbound on the initial assault, they were usually trying to prep the LZ with artillery. And hopefully a couple minutes prior to the landing of the combat assault, the artillery would stop. And it was supposed to be a smoke, airborne smoke that showed that that was the last round of artillery. And then on the first assault, outside gunners would try to shoot into the tree lines and suppress anything, and we'd land and get everybody off right away. 15 seconds in the LZ was too much. Get them all off and take off, and then the next wave and whatnot would come in. When we went into Hamburger Hill, then the movie was backwards. We didn't go up the hill. We put them in right on top of the hill into the fight. The first wave movie shows nice, pretty, clean helicopters, and they weren't that. The first wave, in reality, got 3 aircraft shot down, and I was on standby that day. I was actually on orders out of the division. That was May 20th, 1969. And they brought back one of our company pilots. I was with the Charlie Company then, 158. They brought back one of the pilots who'd been shot in the hand, and we took him out to a hospital ship, came back and joined up with the third wave. And when we came off, our tail boom was full of holes. So we didn't have to go back. Of course, that gives you mixed feelings. Yeah, you're glad you didn't have to go back, but yeah, you wanted to get in there and do your job too, so, for the guys that needed it.
And tell me just a little bit about Hamburger Hill, what happened and the outcome.
Well, yeah, I didn't stay for the outcome, but the outcome was they defended the area and operated out of there for a month or two, and then pulled out and left it to the enemy, just like they did all battles. Take a hill and then leave it.
Was it called Hamburger Hill then, or after?
It was Operation Somerset something. The actual hill was, Vietnamese name was Dong Ap Ba, and then it just became nicknamed Hamburger Hill because there were a lot of casualties. But we, battle-wise, the enemy took a whole lot more casualties than the U.S. did by far. So that's one of those. We supposedly won every battle except the war.
Tell me about going into an LZ now. You have your gunner on board, shooting prior to your landing. I hear they pop smoke. You go in, there's gunships, and then the troops come in.
On the first wave, yeah, there's the artillery preparation. You're shooting as we go in. Once we get troops on the ground, then the ships coming in, gunners aren't going to be shooting unless there's some real careful coordination. But you want to get in and out of there and as quickly as possible. Those Hamburger Hill took me less than 15 seconds, and we came screaming in. The guys split, and we were gone. We came off as we came over the edge of the hill. My gunner was shooting at people down the hill, shooting at us, and he hollered, "I got 3 of them, sir." But difficult to get confirmation. So,
Jim, what's it like flying into combat? I mean, I don't think there's any glamour in war. Hollywood, has the music playing, and Creedence Clearwater Revival's playing, Fortunate Son or whatever. They're going into battle, and I mean, it's probably not like that. But is there music at all? Where does this music thing come in? I mean, you guys listening to music, or what's?
We do. We have on our directional radio. We can tune in the radio stations, and we would listen to the Armed Forces Network radio station, and it would also give us a heading to that was a reference if we got disoriented out in the field somewhere. But yeah, we would listen to music, but during those combat assaults, no, you're just gritting your teeth and hoping you can get in and out of there in one piece. So I would tell all the guys on my helicopter, I says, remember, I'm not worried about you guys. I'm worried about me. I'm going home today. Oh, you're covered. So that was my philosophy, was I couldn't do my job, and if I got shot down, somebody'd have to come get me. But we always knew with most of our missions, aircraft recovery and aircraft crew recovery was first priority if an aircraft went down, so we usually felt pretty good about that.
So are you flying in like one behind each other, not like formations like a plane?
A straight trail, we could be flying a straight trail or a staggered trail or a V depending on the LZ, usually either a straight trail or a staggered trail. And a lot of times the LZs were so small you'd just come in and pick spots. On Hamburger Hill we came in a staggered trail, but just had to find a spot in all of the brush and the trees from the broken down from artillery prep, and to try to get it low enough. We couldn't land to the ground. We just had to get low enough for the guys to jump. They were able to jump from probably within 5 feet. I've had to have guys jump 10, 15, almost 20 feet through trees and brush because I couldn't get any lower than that.
So obviously the Huey's being used to insert troops into the landing areas. And
right.
They weren't always hot LZs, but I'm sure.
Oh no.
Some of them were. A lot.
Most of the stuff was not a hot LZ, and then we'd come back with their resupplies, more ammo, pick up their wounded. And on some of the combat assaults, I used to say each time we come in, we'd get shot at, and the guys on the ground are hiding behind something the whole time. But actually, probably 80 to 90% of the flying was supporting troops in the field, and that was very seldom under fire. We might have to find the guys out in the hole in the jungle and then hover down in a hole in the trees. I remember one time I was going with what's called McGuire rigs. They were ropes tied to the floor of the aircraft and stuck out, and they hung down 250 feet. Well, when I came in to the top of the trees, the hole that they had blown some trees out to make a hole so that we could we'd drop the McGuire rigs, and they were still 50 feet from the ground through triple canopy jungle. So I had to start hovering down, focused on the trees, with my gunner and crew chief talking to me. All right, down 2 feet, sir. Turn your tail left, quarter turn, stop, turn, down some more, back to the right. I had to actually guide my tail boom around branches that were sticking out into the hole in the trees. And then coming back, then we got down low enough, the guys got on the end of the McGuire rig. They sat in a loop and tied a D-ring to their hand so they wouldn't fall out if they got shot. And start back up. Well, and then I had to hover straight up above the trees, another 250 feet to clear them. Well, they were still about 20 feet below the tops of the trees, and I started to lose power. And I had to go forward, fly out of it, and drag them through the trees. So they're kicking the trees out of their way, and I got up, got them out, landed at a fire base and let them off, and this big 6.5-foot Marine comes lumbered up. I said, oh shoot, he's gonna be mad. As he come up, I said, I'm sorry, man, I dragged you through the trees. I was losing power. He said, oh no, thanks for coming to get us. So they were real happy with us.
Tell me about the wounded at times. You had to be used as a medevac. I mean, do you have any memories of that, or was it just kind of like part of the job and nothing specific? But and was it chaotic at times during that and under fire, or taking the wounded and the dead maybe?
Now, I didn't do the specific medevac job, but we might have to haul some wounded back. Any time that a unit was in the field and we were supporting them, we would bring in their wounded and bring out their replacements. And most of the time that was pretty routine. There'd be a medic with them. But the one that's etched in my memory is one of my crew chiefs on a different aircraft had come out. They had gone into this, we had put in the combat assault 3 days prior, and then we came back to bring them out. It was a special forces mission, and the lead aircraft went in, picked up the troops, and as he came out, he lost power, rolled back down into the LZ, rolled over and burned, crashed and burned and trapped the crew chief, and he died in flames. I think finally somebody shot him. 3 days later, they were looking for somebody to go back in and bring him out. And I said, I'll go. And we had to hover in the hole because the aircraft was still there. Drop down ropes to have him tie him. And later they didn't even have him in a body bag. I still smell that. And I didn't even know his name for 30 years until I met the crew chief who was with me on that flight right here in Wichita. So I get together with Gary Mast every once in a while, and the guy had been a personal friend of Gary's, and that was rough on Gary. I think almost rougher on Gary than it was on me. But that's etched in my memory, and I still smell it.
So you're a young man. I mean, did you ever feel invincible? I mean,
Now, I think I was just old enough. I was 25 when I got over there. Turned 25 there my first year, 69. I was just old enough that I knew better than to feel invincible. And with the help of a whole lot of beer. So one of their little sayings was, everyone's a hero at the end of the day, in the club, after the 4th beer.
Well, that's an interesting thought is, you know, after a day, several hard days, a week, or just time in Vietnam, how did you guys wind down and relieve stress? You mentioned beer.
Drank a lot of beer. Drank a lot of beer. I tell people that I spent 10 years in the Army, 2 of it in Vietnam, never spent a day drunk in my life. Week or 2 at a time, maybe. But those were some alcoholic years. No, but I know guys that didn't drink. So not everybody did. That was my outlet. Perhaps not the best one, but...
How about drugs in Vietnam? Were there drugs? Not necessarily in the aviation units, but tell me about that.
Oh, there were drugs all over the place. The unit that I was in the 2nd tour, well, the guys could buy marijuana all over the place. But I figured out early, I said, I don't need anything to mess with my thought process when I'm flying. So yeah, I drank a lot of beer, but that's out of your system in 24 hours or 12 hours later when I'm flying the next day, whereas marijuana stays in your system for 30 days. And the other drugs are even worse. They could buy a little vial about like that, 1 ounce of pure white heroin, 100% uncut, for $5. And then wonder why they had $300 and $400 a day habits when they got home. And my XO had a deal of those, one on my last company on my 2nd tour, about this big, bottles all glued together and tiered up about this high, that we'd found in the company area. Yeah, it was with the aviation companies. And one of my gunners made the statement one day. He says, I only shoot up once in a while to be sociable. As it turned out, the day he told me that, he OD'd that night. And we fired up an aircraft and flew him across the Mekong Delta to Saigon to the rehab hospital, and we got him there alive. So I don't know what happened to him after that, but we got him there alive, still. Otherwise...
So you're there on 2 different tours.
Right.
You opted to go back for that 2nd tour.
Yeah, I came under this delusion that the Army wasn't too bad. And actually, the 2nd tour is when I came into my own more. The 1st tour, I changed the units so much that I never made aircraft commander, which wasn't the norm. And then on my 2nd tour, I got in the company and they made me an aircraft commander within 2 weeks. So by then I had the experience and jumped right in. And like I said, mostly we just had a ball between. We tried to have as much fun as we could.
Was there a lot of adrenaline, obviously, going into a mission? I mean, does it ever become routine? I mean,
to go in to a mission under fire, no, there's nothing routine about it, because no battle plan survives the first contact. One of Murphy's laws. And yeah, it's adrenaline and it's a rush. And boy, when you let down from that, that's when you hit the beer. And some guys would start to miss the rush and they'd want to go back to that. And I said, no, I don't need that.
So you get, what do you called on the radio to go, ahead of time, you all get out there, start up the helicopters, and then there's a point where you all take off.
Yeah, and we're in contact. Everybody's makes a combo check with lead, chalk 1, chalk 2, chalk 3, loud and clear. Lead's off, and then trail coordinates with lead, last flight. I preferred flying trail to lead, and as I would come off in trail, I would call lead, you're up with a flight of 5 or whatever. And we'd maintain our formation, try to keep it pretty loose. On the final approach, we tried to tighten up the formation. Some of the guys said, we got to get, close, half a rotor disc away. I said, no. Training calls for 3 rotor discs, and that's plenty close. We had 2 guys that were flying that half rotor disc almost overlapping, and the lead aircraft bobbled or something, and the guy behind him hit the tail rotor with his main rotor blades. Well, it lost the main rotor blades on the second one. They crashed and they were all killed, and knocked the tail rotor out on the lead one. He managed to land it, and they all walked away.
So one crashed and they're all killed. Were you in this?
I wasn't in that flight. That was before I got to the unit on my second tour. That was about a month prior to when I got there on the second unit. I said, okay, you guys are figuring out that good, tight formation doesn't have to be overly dangerous.
How many troops can you carry on a Huey?
Usually a Huey could carry 8 to 10, depending on how much load. If it was going in with a combat assault and they had a full load, 8. When we would take the Ranger teams out, we would take 5 or 6. And those guys would carry more. Those guys would go out and be able and or get into a fight with a battalion and win. 5 guys. But
did you ever have any conversation with the troops, or that was separate from you?
Well, with those Rangers, that was a strictly volunteer group of pilots from the company in Kingsman when I was with the first company that I was with. And they were real close with the LRPs, the Long Range Recon Patrol, the Rangers. And they would go drink with them at their clubs and coordinate with them on what the mission was. And when they'd put those 5-man teams in, there'd be 2 aircraft, one with the team and they'd leapfrog, trying to disguise where they put the team in so that the team wouldn't be compromised. And then the team's supposed to go out, look for the enemy position and come back to a pickup zone and be picked up. No, those guys would get into fight with the battalion and holler, come and get us. So I think about half the extractions with those LRPs were under fire. I didn't fly the LRPs that much, but I flew Marine recons that we supported the Marines along the DMZ. And they introduced me to 15 seconds of a solid wall of tracers in front of my aircraft. That's another one that's etched into my mind.
Are you fighting the VC, the NVA, or both? I mean,
both. Up north along the DMZ was probably more NVA, and out west in the Ashaw Valley was more NVA. In the hamlet, in the town and the rice paddy areas was VC. Different. The NVA were hard fighters, and we had respect for them as soldiers.
What kind of weapons did they have?
AK-47s was their carry weapon, whereas ours was the M16. AK-47 7.62 millimeter, same caliber as the M60 machine guns, but would fire not quite as fast, I don't think.
So if I'm down in the grass and you're coming in a helicopter and I want to shoot you down, what do you aim for?
Well, you better lead if the aircraft is flying. The 2 times that I took the heaviest fire, the first time with the Marines, I came to a hover. I had to come back into the LZ to pick them up because they'd put me in with the wrong team. Oh no, I don't like going back. So I had, and this was a case where we had to put them in on top of the hill, and they had to jump about 20 feet. And I said, well, I can't get them out where I put them in. I had to move them east, downhill to a bomb crater I think I can get a skid on. And when we came in, I could see them in the bomb crater with their helmets, and they were the right helmets. And there was a huge tree blown down across the, so I got my left skid on the tree, having to hold at a hover and hold it still, and they start piling on, and we started to take fire, and they were leading the aircraft. And my impression was to this day that those bullets were coming up inches in front of the rotor blades. If they'd have hit into the rotor blades, it'd been all over. And the lieutenant was my platoon leader. He was nominally the aircraft commander. That unit was new and didn't have aircraft commanders yet, so he was the pilot in charge. But I had come from the unit that had been in country longer, so I had more experience in Vietnam than he had. So I was flying it. And he said, darn it, he said, Jim, it looks like a hailstorm. I said, shut up, LT, we're busy. And my gunner started shooting, and then I saw a guy come just hauling, he's just hanging there, 2 hands hauling him in by his pack. And the gunner said, that's the last one, sir. And I looked up, and the fire stopped. The shooting stopped, and I pulled in all the power, plus a couple extra pounds of torque for good measure. 50 pounds of torque is maximum, 55 is an over torque. I used 52 that day. And as I rolled over the side of the hill and around the hill, they started shooting again. What they had done was they were leading me, expecting me to fly into it, and I was at a hover picking them up. And then they must have fired off a full magazine and reloaded while I was getting out. We took 1 hit coming out. That was all. I couldn't believe it.
So you were never shot down in Vietnam?
No, that's dangerous. Yeah. No, I was too good, too fast, and much too lucky. And had somebody looking out for me.
So I was going to ask you, I mean, are you a praying man? Are you just your training to get you through it, or what? I mean?
I don't overtly pray, but I believe, and I believe I had some help now and then. I pride myself on never having begged for my life, but I did thank him for it on occasion.
How about any friends shot down on a mission or other times? You mentioned the one crew chief, but any other missions you were on where somebody was shot down?
One of our missions was the LRPs. The crew, two aircraft, were trying to get to the 5-man LRP team in the mountains, and the weather was bad. The first aircraft couldn't get in and finally climbed out through the clouds, and the second aircraft went in. That was with Dave Poley, Dan O'Neill, Dennis Osmond, and Chuck Gerard. They got in, dropped the ammo resupply, otherwise the team wouldn't have lived through the night. And coming out, they either flew into the side, they took fire, and they flew into the side of the mountain. And it was several days before we could recover. We found them. And then another one of the LRP teams went back in and brought them out.
So you were on the radio during this? I mean, the guys...
I wasn't. I was in the unit at the time, but not on that mission. So we had a drunk night out that night. And I later got in contact with Lieutenant O'Neill, Dan O'Neill's sister, via the internet, and described to her what I remembered of it, referred her to that book, Wings of the Eagle. And I told her, I said, I think they were Irish. I told her, I think we gave him a good Irish wake. Praised his abilities and cursed him for making us feel vulnerable. But we did give him a good Irish wake, in effect. So.
When you're over in Vietnam, I mean, is there a strong sense of a purpose of why you're there and what you're fighting for?
Well, it was, by 69, we were at our biggest troop strength. And it was becoming apparent that to most of the soldiers in Vietnam that the Vietnamese just weren't going to be able to really totally defend their country. And then after 69, when they started pulling troops out, it looked like, you know, we were backing out of it. When I went back in 72, that was the last of our ground troops pulled out by February 72, when we stood down the 114th. My call sign was Night 00, Buckshot. And we stood down that aircraft and sent those aircraft home, and then I went to the 18th Corps Aviation Company, Green Delta. My call sign was Green Delta 18. That's the first time that in my flying that I had a call sign, personal call sign, because I was aircraft commander then. And by then, we could see that it was just winding down. We were trying to turn it over to them. And then in 75, everything just collapsed. But I was out of there by then, so.
But as far as the troops, I mean, again, do you think, you hear that, you know, they say, we didn't know what we were fighting for in Vietnam. Did you guys know what you were fighting for? You're fighting for God and country, or survival, or what?
Well, I think the book, We Were Soldiers for Once and Young, Colonel Moore put it, we were fighting for each other. We were there for our buddies, doing what our country asked us to do. We felt like we were trying to contain the communist threat as perceived at the time, and there was a lot of dissension about that. We had one of our guys was one of these Vietnam veterans against the war. And I told him, I said, if I ever catch you near my aircraft, I'll shoot you myself. Because and later he and some others were caught on a bunker with aircraft parts. They'd been sabotaging our aircraft.
Crazy.
Yeah, his own buddies. Now that I couldn't see. I could see being against the idea of the war, but your country's asking you to do a job, let's go do it.
When you came home from either tour, did you receive any type of homecoming?
From my family, and that was it. Otherwise, if you went to the redneck bars or the country bars, there was more favorable support. But if you went to the hippie bars, they spit on you. No. One girl says, "You kill any babies today?" All I could do was say, "Not yet, baby." What an attitude, huh? But that's a defensive attitude. Hey, you know, it's obvious they didn't know what they were talking about. They were confusing an unpopular war with the soldiers that were trying to do their job. I think one of the biggest reasons that we've gotten around that from the Desert Storm to Iraq is our Vietnam veterans have worked very hard to make sure this country welcomes its veterans home and doesn't confuse them trying to do what they're ordered to do with a war they don't agree with. It's okay to disagree with an idea. America's never gone to war willingly, I don't think, from the Revolutionary War on. But the soldiers are the ones that win your freedom for you.
Did you have any problems adjusting to civilian life after being in Vietnam, like some of these veterans have?
I got to learn to quit cussing so much. My first time back playing on the golf course, I was out on the golf course in the middle of my backswing and a car went by and backfired. Now, I don't remember the transition to the ground, but I picked myself up and dusted myself off, and my wife was looking at me like, "What's the matter?" I said, "Don't worry about that. That reaction may have kept me alive a couple times." So I understood that I was going to have those kinds of reactions, and I've gotten through it that way, knowing it's going to happen and not worrying about it, not getting mad at myself for reacting like that. Like some guys would, I ought to be able to take it. Well, no, you can't always take it, dadgummit. Sometimes you got to cry. Sometimes you got to be startled. So we tell people, says, don't sneak up behind an old high-time helicopter pilot and make loud, sudden noises.
Are there any other sights, sounds, or smells that remind you today of Vietnam?
Fortunately, no, I don't think.
Good.
There's nothing else quite like it as far as that, like loud, sudden noises give me a good startle reflex now and then. But
how about hearing helicopters?
Oh, I love the sound though. I got grounded 20 years ago. I flew for 10 years with the Army and then 10 years civilian. And the doctors grounded me. So
wow.
I have a tangle of blood vessels in my head that's malformed and it could bleed.
From your flying days?
No, it's just something that was there. But I also have narcolepsy, which my passengers got tired of waking me up to. And then when I got some testing done, well, that was it. Oh, you mean I got to grow up and work for a living? Well, manage.
So as far as being a helicopter pilot, it's very intriguing what you've done in Vietnam, and I talk to a lot of people now. I'm talking to more, but I guess the Huey fascinates me, and just like the Higgins boats taking the Marines or the soldiers on the Omaha Beach or Iwo Jima mode of transportation and then things. But so I like to pick the brains of the pilots and what you went through. And so, was there a particular harder mission for you, or were they all difficult? Was there one that maybe you've already told me? Was there one that comes to mind that was harder than the others, and why?
Not so much harder, being if you knew where you were going to be going out to take fire. Those were more scary, and you were more apprehensive about those. Long days just taking resupply in and making out. The Air Force has a mission. They take off in the morning, they fly out, they drop their bombs, and they come back, and that's a mission. They do a mission in a day, maybe one every other day. Take off and a landing. Well, we would go out and make 50 takeoffs and landings, do 50, in effect 50 missions in one day, or in the first half of the day, and haul thousands of pounds of supplies, hundreds of people. One combat assault we did along the Cambodian border on the second half of my first tour, we moved over 5,000 Montagnard indigenous mercenaries into special forces camps along the Cambodian border. All day. Nobody took any fire except one of our gunships. Well, I don't remember if it was that day or that was another day. One of our gunships got hit at 5,000 feet, lost the rotor blades. And that another drunk night out. But that day was just a grinding, grueling land, pick up your load of troops, fly, drop them off, back, and just constant circles. So in hard, those were the boring and more tedious and tiring days. The shorter combat assaults would take more out of you. It's surprising how fast you can go from a nice, dry, fresh uniform to soaking wet when...
Tell me about what freedom means to you and the price for freedom, being a Vietnam veteran and an American citizen. What does freedom mean?
Well, the cliche is freedom's not free. And for those who haven't fought for it, it doesn't have the same, it can't have the same flavor. Freedom means that I can come and go. I can get in my car and drive across the country. I don't have to check in with anybody, or I got to let my boss know I'm not going to be back to work for a couple of days. Oh, I don't have to, but then he doesn't have to have me come back to work either. That's part of the freedom. I can go to the grocery store and buy the products I want for a price I can afford. And it has a special flavor, having almost lost my freedom or lost my life on occasion. It just has a life is good. Ain't nobody shooting at us today.
What about the price for freedom? You saw men die in Vietnam.
Well, whether it's for our freedom or theirs, we were supposedly trying to support the South Vietnamese for their freedom. And the price is the veterans. The price is soldiers' blood. For freedom anytime, anywhere, price is blood. And that's if people who don't understand that, I don't know if they have the ability to appreciate freedom as much as those of us who do understand that. I just don't know.
Jim, what does American flag mean and represent to you?
I stand up when I see the American flag. It chokes me up every time. Yeah, it means a lot.
Do people thank you for your service?
I went to see the movie We Were Soldiers. Mel Gibson's movie depicted the first half of the book, We Were Soldiers Once and Young. Joe Gallagher was the only correspondent I ever knew of that actually carried a weapon. And, where was I? After the movie, and that was a hard movie to watch. At one point where the aircraft was going in at night with the tracers coming out, I almost crawled under the seat. And after the movie, I just sat there with my head in my lap for about 15 minutes. My wife just waited for me. And a young couple came over, saw my hat. I said, "Oh, you're a veteran." And they said, "Thank you for your service." And that's the first time in 30-odd years that anyone had ever said that to me. And I choked up. I started to say, "Where were you 30 years ago?" And I said, "Oh, you guys weren't born yet." Well, thank you for the thought. So it's just in the last 5 years for me that I felt, and when I went to my first reunion and met with the LRPs, and they said, "Thanks for coming to get us," that was the first time that I felt here that what we did was appreciated by somebody. So it hadn't always been easy, but I'm a gruff old son of a gun sometimes.
Do you belong to the Vietnam Helicopter Pilots Association?
I never joined the VHPA. I belonged to my Kingsman reunion group and the LRP Kingsman Association. And I did join my 114th Association, but I haven't ever had a chance to meet with those guys. Those reunions just haven't coincided with but I have met with the Kingsman group. That was the first unit that I was with, and that still kind of means the most to me. Even though I didn't make an aircraft as aircraft commander and got shuffled around, that's where I learned my skill. That's where I went from being out of flight school to learning how to fly in combat and survive. They taught me how to stay alive, and I appreciated that. And that's what I try to tell them when I meet them.
Have you been back to Washington to see the wall?
I was at Washington many years ago while I was still on active duty, but I haven't seen the big wall. I've seen the moving wall 3 or 4 times now, and helped serve at one at the cemetery here in Wichita. They had their own wall, and I read the names, or coordinated reading the names. When they got to the page where Dave Poley's name was read, I patted the guy on the back and I read those names. They were from my unit. Out of my flight school class, Larry, there was 40. We lost 10 in the first year, 25%. And I have a friend of my brother-in-law's said they were going to the wall and did we want some rubbings. I sent them a list and they sent them back to me. And then I got some rubbings from the moving walls of all those guys, and of then Ed Hopkins when I got his name after 30 years, the crew chief that we picked up. So, very emotional times, and I learned from my grandfather that it's okay for a man to be emotional.
How would you describe the sound of battle?
I think I'd block it out. By the time I finished flight school, I had almost no high-frequency hearing. Now I have hearing aids. So you fly helicopters for 20 years, see if you can hear anything. It's chaotic. I was focused on my radios, what's going on in the aircraft, and blocked everything else out. Maybe not everybody can do that, but I was able to, thank goodness. For me, it worked.
What about that plexiglass windshield? What if a bullet hit that?
Yeah. Somebody said, oh, those windshields are bulletproof, aren't they? No, the skin's about that thick. And but we sit in an armored, a ceramic armored seat in the Huey, and have a sliding panel. And yes, that time I was taking all that fire, I was trying to slide down under that panel. We had one little fella that was a Navajo Indian, and I looked at him one day, and all I could see around the side of his armored seat was the top of his helmet and his feet sticking out. And I looked up at him and I said, Larry, or I don't remember his name now, but I said, Larry, you're not giving the enemy a chance, are you? He looked at me and smiled and nodded. I said, I hope not. So.
What if you were sitting what if you climbed into an old Huey right now and sat at the controls? What do you think you'd feel?
It just, I do that every chance I get. I just love the feel of it. Love the feel of that Huey. We would stick 2 of those big ceramic chest protectors in the chin bubble, and I'd make my crew chief and gunners sit on one because they didn't have anything underneath them. And that made a difference on occasion.
Jim, we're just about done. What does Vietnam mean to you today as far as what you did, what it was, and does it have a significance in your life?
It still represents 2 of the most emphatic years of my life, and it doesn't go away, and I know it won't. My older son understands it. My younger son says, Daddy, just wishes Dad had shut up now and then, I guess. But it's part of my experience. Like some people have said, I guess I wouldn't give I wouldn't give 2 cents to do it again, but I wouldn't take $1 million for the experience. So it's part of who I am. And some people think I'm an old war horse, and I try to tell them, yeah, I'm a pacifist, but not the kind that turns the other cheek. I fight back.
How old are you now?
I'm 62.
Okay.
So, getting younger every day.
Well, you don't look it. You look really good.
Well, thank you.
Yes, sir. And I want to thank you for what you've done. I mean, met you the other night. I think it was a good thing. And I had an opening today, and this thing just worked out great.
Well, I hope my participation is helpful.
I don't think you guys realize how significant. I interview people that come in, they leave, and it's like, I don't think that you realize it, but when you see this documentary, you're going to be very proud of it, and you're part of it now.
Well, I will get it.
And we'll be in touch, and we'll probably show it here and or in Arizona.
Oh, that'd be great.
The helicopter pilots reunion this summer, but I'll definitely be in touch with you on that. But I'm going to ask you to do one more thing. I ask all the veterans, and you saw my film at the end. At the end, I'd like to get a salute into the camera. So when I tell you, could you do that with your hat from where you're sitting there? Okay, sir, right in the camera. Great. Okay.
I hope that was a more crisp salute than a couple of them I saw.
Some of those old guys.
Some of the guys did that.